Hello and welcome back to my channel where today we're going to finish up the birdhouse that we sketched a couple videos ago. So I hope you've got your sketch ready and we'll start inking and watercoloring. In the previous video that's linked in the doobly-doo down below, I showed how to use a proportional divider to increase the size of the image. This one is printed at 4.5 by 4.5, and the finished drawing is about 7 by 7 for the finished square size. But you can make this whatever size you like for this tutorial. Anything works. And if you need to trace it instead of enlarging it and just make it the size that it is, that's just great. So I've got my pen lines down here, and you might remember from the previous video, I noticed while I was doing the voiceover that I got my box wrong because I did my measurement wrong for this bird, this house sparrow that's up on top. And he came out a little bit on the squat side, so I had to increase the reach of his beak a little bit further and make him a little bit chunkier. I still don't think he's quite right, but it is a sketch, and I wasn't looking to be perfect. I was just looking to make a quick sketch of this photograph. I have a bird feeder outside of my dining room right now, and I have just been loving seeing all the birds out there and keep thinking I need to just sit and sketch them every morning. So I'm probably going to do that for my next phenology wheel to keep track of what birds are coming around at this time of year. The pen I'm using for this one is a TWSBI Eco, and it's the medium nib, and it's a rather beefy size nib. It's a little on the thicker side, but when I'm working on watercolor paper, I can get different line widths because I can use different pressure on this bumpy paper. And sometimes I can get a lighter, more skippy kind of sketchy line, which is helpful. In the previous video, when I showed the owl, I used a much smoother paper, so I didn't have as much control over the type of line because that paper is smooth and it's meant to get a nice single crisp line. So it takes a little bit more to try to get a little bit different line weights for them. The lines that I'm creating, I'm doing them just kind of sketchy. I'm not using a ruler. I know that might be driving some of you bananas. That's okay. You can use a ruler if you want to, but it's just a birdhouse sketch. So feel free to just practice making lines. Now, a little trick if you're new to inking is that when you're making a line, you want it to end somewhere. Don't watch the pen as it's making the line. Don't keep your eyes on that. Keep your eyes on where you want the line to end up at. So if you are making the curve of the side of a bird or you're making the wall down the side of the house, look at the place where the line is supposed to end at. And that's what's going to get your pen there. Because otherwise, it's like when you're driving on the road and you're looking at the gutter, you'll drive into the gutter. If you're looking at the road up ahead of you and you're keeping your eyes on the cars in front of you and the direction that you're headed, that's when you're going to stay on the road. So I would highly recommend doing the same kind of a thing with your pens. And you can decide whether you want to add the kind of detail that I'm going to add to mine. I've got the main shapes in here and adding the little birdies on the inside of the birdhouse, but I'm going to be adding some texture into the wood. You can always paint the texture in, but for something like this, I just thought it would be fun to use some lines to make the texture of that and go from there. In making a series of lines, I find that it's easiest to turn the paper in the direction that my hand is going to most easily make those lines. And sometimes it's just going to be a whole lot easier when you're creating lines to turn your paper sideways. On videos, I tend to try to stay vertical with the paper because otherwise I know it kind of makes people dizzy. It makes me dizzy when somebody's flipping the paper around all different directions, but it often helps to turn the paper. Now I've made a darker shadow underneath of the eave of the house because that's where I see the darkness in the photograph. And I'm also adding lines onto each of the little wooden edges that are around the entire house. And I'm making kind of sketchy lines. Remember when I said I could kind of release pressure and just draw sketchy lines? That's what I mean. It's just going to make something that feels a little more like a wooden texture, and it'll make all those edges match all the way around the house. For the roof of the house, I decided I was going to make it much easier than what is shown because there are some places where the wood is kind of peeling up. I guess that might be paint on the roof and it's peeling or something. I'm not sure what's going on there, but I'm just going to do a consistent texture and it's going to go at the same angles as the roof line did. Just following along with those. And again, I'm making sketchy lines, making some coming down from the top, some going up from the bottom, and they start and stop in random places. So it just feels more like wood overall. I'm using a pencil to help me have a straight edge against which I can draw that shadow. So I'm just doing some vertical lines and they'll all stop at the same place because of that pencil holding things back. I can do the same thing on the wood on the front of the house is going a different direction. You can see some of those lines in the paint that's on the front. But the shadow I can make go at the same angle as well. And I can do that in the same way by holding the pencil out as a barrier to keep my pen lines from going out too far. I was trying to figure out whether or not I should keep going over top of the little birdies in the birdhouse that are peeking out. And the shadow really does go over them. There's just a little bit of the beaks that stick out. So I'm just going to go with it. And then I'll complete some of the lines around the outside edging of the house, around that frame. And then a few lines here and there in the birds. I'm going to do the birds more in watercolor because I want more of their details to be softer. Whereas the house, I want some more sharp details, but I will add a little bit to it just so it feels like it's in the same character as the rest of the drawing. And here I'll add a bit more onto the chest of the bird because the house sparrow has a little darker value up in there, and a little bit around the wings just to put a little bit in there so it all kind of goes together. According to the Googles, this bird is actually a southern gray-headed sparrow. And I guess the southern gray-headed sparrow decided it was going to hang out with the house sparrow or vice versa. Because those little babies, I'm assuming, are going to be the gray-headed sparrow bird since that bird looks like it's the one feeding them. So we do have a bit of a mixed bird household going on here, I think. Unless they're just neighbors. Maybe they're just neighbors. Who knows? So I'm going to use horizontal lines to make the shadow underneath of the house. And if you were drawing it and you didn't watch my video, then you missed that you need to put the bottom of the house in there because that's what gives it that sense that we're underneath of it and we're looking up at the birdhouse. A lot of people end up skipping little details like that. The proportional divider really helps me to make sure I'm paying attention to all those little details. So I added just a little bit more onto the house and we're ready to start watercoloring. I'm using all Daniel Smith watercolors. I tend to like them because they're pigmented nicely. They're light fast. Most of them are light fast. There's a few colors that aren't. And they just work beautifully. I've tried lots of other brands and haven't been as tickled with them, but you can use anything for watercoloring this. I'm using New Gamboge for this side of the house. I think this is actually a faded paint job on this side. That's what I'm guessing because the value on that side is much lighter than the front of the house here. The front of the house might not get that much sunlight. So maybe that's what's going on, or did they use two different yellows? I don't really know, but I'm using a thicker mixture of New Gamboge, and I dropped in a little tiny bit of the Aussie Red Gold that's now in my palette. I added that back in because I realized I kind of missed it from years gone by. It does feel very much like New Gamboge, and I can, kind of bring that sort of thing to it using a little bit of red in my yellow. But for now, that's in there. And I can never decide when something comes out of my palette or goes back in, always changing my mind. Now there's some paint that looks like it's either reflecting underneath of those eaves, or the, not plural, one eave underneath that portion under the roof, and leaving just some of that in there, along with mixing in some transparent red oxide, or if you have burnt sienna, that's kind of very close in color, painting that in for the shadow, and then also for the shadow on the side of the house that's facing us. And now that that side facing us is dry enough, then the paint doesn't just kind of keep going running all over the place. But if yours is still really, really wet, then wait till later and you can get a sharper line across there if you'd like that. Now I use the mixture that's there that had kind of that brownish color in it, and I'm mixing some French ultramarine into it. French ultramarine and the transparent red oxide or a burnt sienna are going to make a gray if they're in the right balance. If it's not in the right balance, you get more of a brown color. So just add a little more blue to it. And if you get too blue, then add a little brown to it and keep going back and forth till you get the kind of gray you want. And it's a very wet kind of color. I put a lot of water in it, and I let some of it touch the yellow that's in there. So that will climb up into the roof and just add some interest. I love that watercolor does that on its own. So decided I would make sure that I ended up kind of pushing that a little bit. I mixed up a darkish kind of gray out of the same two colors, the brown and the blue, and put that on the chest of the house sparrow up top. And then I mixed a thinner color that's a little bit more on the reddish brown side and very watered down, so I get lighter value. And that gray that I put down in the first stroke is just going to blend softly into them. For the other sparrow, I wanted to use the color that was in my brush already because it was still messy, and add some yellow ochre to it. And that'll give both birds a slightly different color feel to them, since they are different species and they probably appreciate that about each other. So I let it all dry completely so I can move on to putting in more details. And I've moved to a smaller brush. My other brush, I don't know if I mentioned it, was a number 8 round. And this one is a number 4 round. And I've mixed up a thicker pigment. And this has more of the transparent red oxide in it because this bird has a much redder head and a redder back to it, as you'll know if you have the photo there that you're working from. And just going to add in a few areas of dark shadow, and then using just a little bit of the thinner pigment to, kind of darken in underneath of the belly of the bird, that kind of thing, soften up a few things. And that looks pretty close to what I see for that little house sparrow. Looks like some of mine because we have plenty of house sparrows where I live. So I'll mix some blue into the brown. That's going to give me a darker value. The thicker the paint, the darker the value, and it's also going to dull it down. So it'll give me a duller and darker type of brown to add in a few details. And then I'll switch over to the other bird and add in some shadow values there too, to start making that bird look a little bit more round and fulsome. And gosh, there was something I was going to tell you, and I don't remember what it was. Oh, I remember. I was going to talk about my nature journaling class that's coming up. If you like to do little paintings like this, I'm going to be hosting a nature journaling class in 2026. And there's going to be all different kinds of things involved in it because we have a whole year to do it. I haven't really worked out all the details. I will talk about that in a specific video coming up as I start to work that out. But I kind of talked through some ideas with a good friend of mine who is also an instructor in nature journaling, and she's going to give me some advice and some help along the way. And maybe I can talk her into doing some art with us as well. So if you enjoy things like little birdies, then you might enjoy the class. So if you want more information on that, then you obviously need to subscribe to my channel. But there's also an email list on my teaching website, and that's at art-classes.com. So there'll be a link in the doobly-doo. And you can sign up for the email list on that site, and that will give you more information when we have more information to give. So I mixed up the darker gray, mixed some of that in for the little baby birds because they're mostly kind of grayish in color. And then I'm using that for all the edging around the outside of the birdhouse. Now, that's not the actual color that I see in the photo. So, why am I doing that? I wanted something that was going to feel a little bit punchier. The whole photo in general felt a little on the soft side to me because there's a couple spots that had really dark areas in them, like the birds in the inside and a few of the details on the bird up on top, but a lot of it was just like washed out in the sunshine. So, when you're doing a painting of some kind, feel free to adapt if you think you have a better idea than whoever painted the birdhouse, because this one is very pale. And I thought it would be kind of nice for this sketch to have it be a little bit stronger in value. So I'm using some of the darker color to start putting in that shadow underneath of the roof because that's an area where we can also afford to really amp up some value and some color. And I'm using a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of, this, that, and the other to try to give myself a better shadow color because I want to really reaffirm that shadow underneath of the roof line and wanted something that was going to feel more alive. Sometimes using a burnt sienna or a transparent red oxide by itself feels very flat. And since there was so much yellow under it, I wanted something that would just feel like it almost vibrated. And I also wanted that shadow across the that forward side to be a little weaker than the shadow on the front of the house. So, kind of mixed up a little bit more water in it, a little bit of that, little bit more of the yellow in it to give it a slightly different value overall. And then, of course, a nice dark value is a good thing to put underneath of the house because there will be not very much light, probably in any situation like this, bouncing up from underneath. I'm guessing this is attached to a wall somewhere. It's what it kind of looks like in the photograph. So there's no pole for it that I can see. There's a little stick of something underneath. So maybe there is something there, but can't quite tell. You're welcome to add a post under yours if you want. But I'm going to use that dark color as well to add a shadow. And I'm just going to add the shadow based on what I see and not really stress out about it too much. If you feel like you need to draw in a pencil line, you'll end up probably with a pencil trapped underneath this watercolor. That's why I didn't draw it in earlier, so I could just paint it over. And while it's very brown, I painted it on top of the yellow, and then I mixed up some blue in it so I could push it more toward a thicker, darker gray. And then I can add in some really dark shadows into some of those gray spots. So right where the shadow hits that gray border, I can add some. I can put some more dark shadow underneath that section, that kind of thing. So you can add a few more dark details as you need. So my little birdies are ready to have their breakfast now. Hopefully yours are or will be soon. If you'd like to grab the photo and get a sketch done and follow along with this tutorial, you're welcome to do that. Visit my art stack over on Substack and you can get the picture and more information about wash and ink because I'm going to be talking about that on the Substack today. You can share your work with me. I would love to see your painting. And you can do so on social media. Just tag me wherever you like to post your work, Reddit, Instagram, whatevers. And you could also go to ArtVenture. ArtVenture is free to join. It's my free community on Mighty Networks. There's a link in the doobly-doo to all of this, by the way. And we have fun at ArtVenture. We have monthly Zoom calls. We have challenges. We have like people sharing their art, and there are no ads and no crazy reels and no algorithms. So come join. It's free. I'd love to see you there. And yeah, I'll see you back here in a couple days with more art. Take care. Bye-bye.